The wagon wheels groaned as they crossed the last stretch of rutted road, iron rims biting into frozen mud, the sound carrying across the open land like a warning. The rancher stood near the hitching post, hands resting on the worn leather of his belt, watching the dust rise and settle in pale clouds against the winter sky. He had imagined this moment in pieces for weeks, how a stranger would look stepping into his life, how he would greet her, whether his voice would sound awkward or steady. None of those imagined pieces fit what he saw when the wagon finally stopped. She did not step down right away. For a heartbeat too long, she remained seated, hands folded in her lap, back straight as if bracing against a blow that hadn't yet fallen. The driver cleared his throat, glanced at the rancher, then at her, and finally hopped down to unload the small trunk. It was lighter than it should have been for a woman crossing half a country to marry a man she had never met. The rancher noticed that too, though he couldn't have said why it mattered. When she finally stood, the cold caught the edge of her coat and tugged it close around her frame. She was thinner than the photograph he had received, thinner even than he'd prepared himself for. Then she turned her face toward him, and the bruise revealed itself fully, a dark, ugly bloom beneath one eye, yellowing at the edges, as if it had been there long enough to tell a story of its own. The rancher felt something inside him still, not shock. He had known hard lives, had seen what the world did to people who lacked protection, but a kind of quiet reckoning. This was not a romantic beginning. This was not the tidy answer to loneliness he had half hoped for when he sent his letter east. This was something heavier, something that would not be solved by a roof and a ring. The driver handed him a folded note with a look that said more than words could manage. "She's yours now," the man muttered, as if transferring ownership instead of responsibility. Then, without waiting for reply, he climbed back onto the wagon, flicked the reins, and turned the horses around. The wheels creaked away, carrying the last easy exit with them. For a moment, the rancher and the woman stood facing each other in the quiet that followed, the wind threading through the dry grass. The mountains crouched low and watchful in the distance. She kept her eyes on his boots, as if meeting his gaze required permission she hadn't been granted. He cleared his throat, then stopped himself. Words felt dangerous, too sharp for the fragile space between them. Instead, he reached out, not toward her, but toward the trunk, lifting it easily and setting it beside the house. Only then did he unfold the note. The paper was thin, the handwriting cramped. It explained nothing and everything at once. A few lines, an apology from someone unnamed, a plea for patience, a warning wrapped in politeness. She had been hurt. She was not to blame. Kindness was not optional. He folded the note again carefully, as if rough handling might undo whatever small mercy it offered. When he looked back up, she was watching him now, eyes wide and guarded, her breath shallow. She looked ready to run, despite having nowhere to go. "You're not alone now," he said, the words leaving his mouth before he'd fully weighed them. They sounded strange in the open air, too intimate for two people who had yet to exchange names. He hadn't meant them as a promise exactly, more like a statement of fact, but he saw how they landed, how her shoulders tightened and then, almost imperceptibly, loosened. She nodded once, no smile, no tears, just a nod, as if storing the words somewhere deep for later examination. He gestured toward the house. "It's warm inside," he added. "You should come in." She followed at a careful distance, steps light, as though testing the ground with each one. The rancher became acutely aware of his own size then, the width of his shoulders, the heaviness of his boots. He slowed without thinking, matching her pace, giving her room to breathe. Inside, the house smelled of wood smoke and coffee grounds. It was clean but spare, everything chosen for use rather than beauty. He watched her eyes move from corner to corner, cataloging exits, noting the position of furniture, the way someone trained by fear does when entering a new place. It pained him to recognize that look so easily. He set the trunk near the wall. "You can take the back room," he said. "It's quiet." She nodded again, then hesitated, fingers twisting together. "Thank you," she said softly. Her voice was rough, as if it had gone unused. He wanted to ask her name. He wanted to ask what had happened, who had done that to her face, whether the note told the whole truth or only the safest part. Instead, he poured water into the kettle and set it on the stove, letting the ordinary actions ground him. Safety, he knew, was made of such things: predictable sounds, simple kindnesses, the absence of demand. As the kettle warmed, he noticed her standing uncertainly near the door, coat still on, hands clasped tight. He motioned toward the chair by the table. "You can sit," he said. "No hurry." She sat, perching on the edge as if prepared to rise at a moment's notice. The bruise looked worse in the lamplight, the colors stark against her pale skin. He forced himself not to stare. He focused on the kettle instead, on the steam beginning to whisper. When he turned back, he saw her eyes on the note in his hand. He realized he was still holding it, knuckles white. Without thinking, he slipped it into his pocket, away from sight. Some things, he understood, did not need to be shared immediately. The kettle sang. He poured the water, set a cup in front of her, then stepped back again, leaving space. She watched the steam curl upward, as if it were something alive. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Inside, the rancher stood and waited, unsure what shape this new life would take. Only certain of one thing: whatever storms had brought her here, they had ended at his door. And whether he was ready or not, he intended to keep that door closed against them. Morning came slowly to the ranch, not with light but with sound. The low breath of cattle drifted in through the walls, the creak of wood cooling after the night fire died, the faint whistle of wind slipping through cracks that had never bothered the rancher before. He woke before dawn out of habit, staring at the ceiling for a long moment, listening for something he could not quite name. Only after a few heartbeats did he realize what it was: silence from the back room. No footsteps, no movement, no sign that the woman he had brought inside the night before had vanished like a bad dream. He rose quietly, pulling on his boots without lacing them fully, and crossed the house with care he rarely used. The back room door was closed, but a thin line of light shone beneath it. He paused there, hand hovering uselessly in the air, then stepped away. Knocking felt like a demand. Opening the door felt worse. Instead, he went to the stove and set about making coffee, letting the ordinary rhythm of his morning anchor the space. The smell reached her before he did. She sat upright on the edge of the narrow bed, fully dressed as she had been when she arrived, boots on, coat folded beside her like armor she wasn't ready to put down. She had not slept much. Every creak of the house, every sigh of wind had tightened her muscles, had pulled her back into memories she'd crossed miles to escape. But the sounds here were different. They were steady, familiar in a way that suggested routine rather than threat. When she finally stepped into the main room, she stopped just inside the doorway, fingers brushing the frame as if to reassure herself it was solid. The rancher was at the stove, back turned, movements unhurried. He glanced over his shoulder once, nodded in greeting, and returned to his task. "There's bread," he said simply, "and coffee if you like it." She nodded, then corrected herself. "Yes, thank you." Her voice was quieter in the morning, roughened by a night of shallow sleep. They ate without speaking much, the silence not awkward so much as tentative, like a bridge still under construction. He noticed how she tore the bread into small pieces, how she ate slowly, as if unsure when the food might disappear. He slid the basket a little closer to her without comment. She noticed, hesitated, then took another piece. After breakfast, he pulled on his coat. "I've got chores," he said. "You don't have to help, but you can if you want." Her eyes flicked up, searching his face for something. Expectation, command, judgment. Finding none, she nodded again. "I'd like to," she said, surprising herself with the truth of it. Outside, the air was sharp, clean enough to sting. The ranch stretched out in quiet order, fences running straight, the barn squat and dependable, the land bearing the marks of care even in winter. She followed him at a distance at first, watching the way he moved among the animals, calm and assured. He spoke to the horses in a low voice, his touch gentle, his presence unquestioned. It was impossible not to notice. He handed her a bucket of feed without ceremony, showing her what to do, then stepping back. Her hands trembled at first, but the work was simple, honest. The animals did not judge. They did not ask questions. They accepted what she offered and moved on. Something in her loosened as the morning wore on. The bruise on her face caught the light now and then, a stark contrast to the quiet dignity of her movements. The rancher saw it, felt that familiar heat rise in his chest, and forced himself to breathe through it. Anger would not help her, restraint might. By midday her cheeks were flushed from the cold, her shoulders less drawn up around her ears. When he called a break, she followed him back inside without hesitation this time. He ladled soup into bowls, setting one in front of her, then took his place across the table. She studied him over the rim of her spoon. He was not what she had expected, not soft, but not hard either. There was no hunger in his eyes, no sense of claim, only curiosity, tempered by something like caution. "Why did you choose a May order bride?" she asked suddenly, the question tumbling out before she could stop it. He did not flinch. He considered the question, then answered honestly, "Because this land gets lonely," he said, "and because I don't do well in towns." She nodded, accepting that. I answered because it seemed safer than where I was. He met her gaze then, steady and unblinking. "Is it safer here?" She thought of the locked door, the way he had not asked her to explain, the way he had given her space like a gift. "Yes," she said quietly, "I think it is." The afternoon passed in small tasks, mending a strap, sweeping the floor, stacking wood. He showed her where things went, never correcting her unless necessary. Each small kindness settled into her bones, easing a tension she had carried for so long it felt like part of her. That night, she slept more deeply, the coffee cup still warm in her hands as she drifted off. The rancher sat by the fire, staring into the flames, thinking of the note in his pocket, of the responsibility he had taken on without fully understanding its weight. He felt no regret, only resolve. Outside, the wind howled, but inside the house held, and for the first time in a long while, neither of them felt completely alone. The evening settled in gently, not like a curtain dropping, but like a breath slowly released. The ranch quieted in layers. The animals stilled first, then the wind eased, then even the house itself seemed to lean into rest. The woman sat at the small table near the window, a folded piece of paper resting beneath her fingertips. She had taken it out of her pocket 3 times already, smoothed it, folded it again, and each time told herself she would put it away. Each time she failed, the rancher noticed without asking. He had learned, even in these few days, that questions arrived best when invited. He finished rinsing the dishes, dried his hands on a cloth worn thin by years of use, and leaned back against the counter, giving her the choice of silence or speech. She drew a slow breath. "There's something you should know," she said. Her voice did not shake, but it carried the careful precision of someone choosing each word like a step across ice. He nodded once. "All right." She slid the note across the table toward him. He recognized it immediately, though he had never unfolded it since that first day. Seeing it again made his jaw tighten, but he kept his face neutral. "It's not everything," she said. "It couldn't be. I was afraid if they wrote too much, you wouldn't take me." He did not reach for the paper yet. "You're here," he said. "That's what matters." Her fingers curled into the wood. "I didn't come untouched," she continued. "Not just my face. There are things, habits, fears. I don't always react the way I should." "There's no should about it," he said quietly. She looked up then, really looked at him, as if testing whether those words were solid enough to stand on. Something in her expression shifted, not relief exactly, but permission. She began at the beginning, or as close to it as she could manage. She spoke of promises made quickly and broken even faster, of kindness that came with conditions, of a home that wasn't safe, no matter how clean the floors were kept, She did not dwell on the worst details. She didn't have to. The spaces between her words were heavy enough. The rancher listened, hands folded, back straight, eyes never leaving her face. Anger rose in him again, sharp and hot, but he kept it banked. This story was not fuel for his rage. It was something fragile she was placing in his care. When she finished, the room felt fuller, as if her truth had weight and now occupied space between them. She exhaled shakily, then laughed once, short and humorless. "There," she said. "Now you know what kind of woman you brought home." He reached for the note then, unfolded it slowly, and set it aside. "I know what happened to you," he said. "That's not the same thing." She blinked, confusion flickering across her face. "Isn't it? No," he said firmly. "What happened isn't who you are, and it doesn't get to decide what you're worth." Her throat tightened. She looked away quickly, embarrassed by the sting in her eyes. No one had ever drawn that line so clearly before. "I won't pretend I can fix it," he went on, "or that this place will make everything easy, but you won't be hurt here, not by me, not by anyone I can stop." The certainty in his voice did something to her. It wasn't loud, it didn't demand belief, it simply existed like the mountains outside the window. They sat in silence for a long moment after that, the fire crackling softly. She felt the tension drain from her shoulders inch by inch, leaving behind a tiredness that was deeper than exhaustion, the kind that comes when vigilance is no longer required. Later that night, she lay awake in the back room, staring at the ceiling. The door was still unlocked. She realized she hadn't checked it. The realization startled her more than any sound might have. She turned onto her side, clutching the blanket, and let herself cry silently into the pillow, mourning not just what she had lost, but what she was only now discovering was possible. The next days carried a different weight. Not lighter, exactly, but steadier. She moved through the ranch with growing confidence, her steps less hesitant, her hands less unsure. She began to hum while she worked, soft at first, then louder when she forgot herself. The rancher noticed, and each time he did, something eased in his chest. One afternoon, as they repaired a stretch of fence, she startled at the sudden crack of a post snapping into place. She froze, breath caught, eyes wide. The rancher stopped immediately, stepping back, lowering his hands. "It's all right," he said, voice calm. "It's just the wood." She nodded, forcing herself to breathe, embarrassed by the reaction. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I know it's silly." "It's not," he said simply. "Take your time." She did, and when she picked the hammer back up, she did it with a little more trust in herself. That evening, she cooked for the first time. It wasn't elaborate, just stew, thick with vegetables, but she watched him eat with an intensity that made him smile. "It's good," he said truthfully. She relaxed visibly. "I used to cook," she said, "before." "You can cook here," he replied. "If you want to." "I do," she said, surprised again by the certainty of it. As the days turned into weeks, the bruise faded completely, leaving only memory behind. She caught her reflection in the mirror one morning and barely recognized the woman looking back. Her eyes were clearer, her posture straighter, not healed. She knew better than that, but no longer broken. One night, she brought the note to the fire and held it there, watching the edges curl and blacken. She hesitated, then looked at him. "Are you sure?" he asked gently. She nodded. "I don't need it anymore." He watched as she fed it to the flames, the paper disappearing in moments, the words turning to ash. She felt lighter as it burned, as if something that had followed her across miles had finally been laid to rest. When she sat back down, he handed her a cup of coffee, their fingers brushing briefly. She didn't flinch. "What happens now?" she asked. He thought about the land, the seasons, the quiet work that filled his days. He thought about her laughter, her growing strength, the way the house no longer felt empty. "Now," he said, "we keep going, one day at a time, together if you want." She smiled then, not the careful, guarded curve of her lips from before, but something real and unguarded. "I want that," she said. Outside, the stars burned bright and indifferent, but inside the small house, something solid had taken root. Not just a marriage arranged by letters and necessity, but a partnership built from listening, patience, and the shared decision to choose forward instead of back. And for the first time since she could remember, she believed, truly believed, that the past no longer owned her. Spring did not arrive all at once. It crept in quietly, like a guest unsure of welcome, testing the ground with warmer mornings and softer light. The snow retreated in patches, revealing dark, patient soil beneath, and the ranch seemed to exhale after holding its breath all winter. The woman noticed the change before the rancher did. She felt it in her bones, in the way she woke each morning with a little less weight pressing on her chest. She stood at the back door one dawn, wrapped in a shawl, watching the horizon pale. The land looked different now, not just because the season was turning, but because she no longer saw it as borrowed space. It had begun quietly to feel like hers too. The rancher joined her without a word, handing her a mug of coffee. Their shoulders brushed, and neither of them moved away. The silence between them was no longer fragile. It had grown into something sturdy, shaped by shared mornings and long evenings, by work done side by side, and truths spoken without fear of consequence. "We should plant soon," she said, nodding toward the patch of ground behind the house. He smiled faintly. "You read my mind." They worked that day with sleeves rolled up, hands sinking into the cold earth. She chose the seeds carefully, lingering over each packet as if it mattered deeply what they began with. Carrots, beans, a small row of herbs. Nothing grand, just enough to tend, enough to watch grow. As they planted, she told him small stories from her past, not the painful ones, not anymore, but ordinary memories that had survived everything else. A neighbor who used to sing too loudly, a market stall with the best bread. He listened, smiling at the sound of her voice carrying something like nostalgia instead of grief. That afternoon, a rider passed by the fence, slowing when he saw her. His eyes lingered too long. The rancher noticed immediately, stepping closer without touching her, his presence unmistakable. The rider tipped his hat and moved on. She released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Thank you," she said later. "For what?" "For seeing it," she replied, "and for not making it a thing." He nodded. "You don't owe anyone comfort." The words stayed with her. The porch swing took him 3 evenings to build. She watched from the doorway the first night, unsure if she was invited into that space of effort and intention. On the second night, she brought him a lantern. On the third, she sat beside him, handing him nails, her knee brushing his. When it was done, he tested it once, then stood aside. "You first," he said. She hesitated only a moment before sitting. The swing creaked, then steadied. She laughed, a real laugh, sudden and surprised, and covered her mouth as if startled by the sound of herself. He joined her a moment later, the swing dipping under their combined weight, settling into an easy rhythm. They talked there often after that, sometimes about the future, sometimes about nothing at all. Sometimes they just watched the sky darken, the first stars appearing one by one. One evening, she brought out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Her hands shook as she unfolded it, revealing the ring. "I don't want this to be because I need safety," she said. "I want it to be because I choose you." He took the ring gently, holding it like something sacred. "I don't want it if it's anything else," he said. She met his eyes, steady now. "Then I choose you." He slid the ring onto her finger, his touch careful, reverent. There were no witnesses, no declarations shouted to the world. Just the quiet certainty of a promise freely given. Life did not become perfect after that. She still startled sometimes. He still woke from dreams of empty rooms. But when those moments came, they faced them together. She learned that she could say no and be heard. He learned that strength could be gentle without losing its power. The garden sprouted. Green shoots broke through the soil, stubborn and alive. She knelt to tend them, dirt under her nails, sunlight warming her back, and felt something settle inside her at last. One morning, She caught her reflection in the window as she worked. There was no bruise, no shadow of one, just a woman standing on her own land in her own life, no longer waiting for permission to exist. The rancher watched her from a distance, pride and gratitude twisting together in his chest. He had offered shelter, she had brought life back into the house. As the season turned fully, the ranch no longer felt like a refuge from the world. It felt like a beginning.